Section 12 of Confessions, volumes 1 and 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. Confessions, volumes 1 and 2, by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Anonymously translated. Section 12. The difficulty still remained how I was to gain a subsistence. I have already observed that I knew too little of engraving for that to furnish my resource, and had I been more expert, Savoy was too poor a country to give much encouragement to the arts. The above-mentioned glutton, who ate for us as well as himself, being obliged to pause in order to gain some relaxation from the fatigue of it, imparted a piece of advice which, according to him, came express from heaven, though, to judge by its effects, it appeared to have been dictated from a direct contrary quarter. This was that I should go to Turin, where, in a hospital instituted for the instruction of catechumens, I should find food, both spiritual and temporal, be reconciled to the bosom of the church, and meet with some charitable Christians who would make it a point to procure me a situation that would turn to my advantage. In regard to the expenses of the journey, continued our adviser, his Grace my Lord Bishop will not be backward, when once Madame has proposed this holy work, to offer his charitable donation. And Madame the Baroness, whose charity is so well known, once more addressing himself to the continuation of his meal, will certainly contribute. I was by no means pleased with all these charities. I said nothing, but my heart was ready to burst with vexation. Madame de Warrens, who did not seem to think so highly of this expedient as the projector pretended to do, contented herself by saying every one should endeavor to promote good actions, and that she would mention it to his lordship. But the meddling devil, who had some private interest in this affair, and questioned whether she would urge it to his satisfaction, took care to acquaint the almoners with my story, and so far influenced those good priests, that when Madame de Warrens, who disliked the journey on my account, mentioned it to the bishop, she found it so far concluded on, that he immediately put into her hands the money designed for my little viaticum. She dared not advance anything against it. I was approaching an age when a woman like her could not, with any propriety, appear anxious to retain me. My departure being thus determined by those who undertook the management of my concerns, I had only to submit, and I did it without much repugnance. Though Turin was at a greater distance from Madame de Warrens than Geneva, yet, being the capital of the country I was now in, it seemed to have more connection with Annecy than a city under a different government and of a contrary religion. Besides, as I undertook this journey in obedience to her, I considered myself as living under her direction, which was more flattering than barely to continue in the neighborhood. To sum up all, the idea of a long journey coincided with my insurmountable passion for rambling, which already began to demonstrate itself. To pass the mountains, to my eye appeared delightful. How charming the reflection of elevating myself above my companions by the whole height of the Alps. To see the world is an almost irresistible temptation to a Genevan. Accordingly I gave my consent. He who suggested the journey was to set off in 2 days with his wife. I was recommended to their care. They were likewise made my purse bearers, which had been augmented by Madame de Warrens, who, not contented with these kindnesses, added secretly a pecuniary reinforcement, attended with the most ample instructions, and we departed on the Wednesday before Easter. The day following, my father arrived at Annecy, accompanied by his friend, a Monsieur Rival, who was likewise a watchmaker. He was a man of sense and letters, who wrote better verses than Lamotte, and spoke almost as well. What is still more to his praise, he was a man of the strictest integrity, but whose taste for literature only served to make one of his sons a comedian. Having traced me to the house of Madame de Warrens, they contented themselves with lamenting like her my fate, instead of overtaking me, which, as they were on horseback and I on foot, they might have accomplished with the greatest ease. My uncle Bernard did the same thing. He arrived at Confessions, received information that I was gone to Annecy, and immediately returned back to Geneva. Thus my nearest relations seemed to have conspired with my adverse stars to consign me to misery and ruin. By a similar negligence, my brother was so entirely lost that it was never known what was become of him. My father was not only a man of honor, but of the strictest probity, and endured with that magnanimity which frequently produces the most shining virtues. I may add, he was a good father, particularly to me, whom he tenderly loved. But he likewise loved his pleasures, and since we had been separated, other connections had weakened his paternal affections. He had married again at Nyons, and though his second wife was too old to expect children, she had relations. My father was united to another family, surrounded by other objects, and a variety of cares prevented my returning to his remembrance. He was in the decline of life, and had nothing to support the inconveniences of old age. My mother's property devolved to me and my brother, but during our absence the interest of it was enjoyed by my father. I do not mean to infer that this consideration had an immediate effect on his conduct, but it had an imperceptible one, and prevented him from making use of that exertion to regain me which he would otherwise have employed. And this, I think, was the reason that, having traced me as far as Annecy, he stopped short, without proceeding to Chambéry, where he was almost certain I should be found; and likewise accounts for why, on visiting him several times since my flight, he always received me with great kindness, but never made any efforts to retain me. This conduct in a father whose affection and virtue I was so well convinced of, has given birth to reflections on the regulation of my own conduct, which have greatly contributed to preserve the integrity of my heart. It has taught me this great lesson of morality: perhaps the only one that can have any conspicuous influence on our actions, that we should ever carefully avoid putting our interests in competition with our duty, or promise ourselves felicity from the misfortunes of others; certain that in such circumstances, however sincere our love of virtue may be, sooner or later it will give way, and we shall imperceptibly become unjust and wicked, in fact, however upright in our intentions. This maxim, strongly imprinted on my mind, and reduced, though rather too late, to practice, has given my conduct an appearance of folly and whimsicality, not only in public, but still more among my acquaintances. It has been said I affected originality, and sought to act different from other people. The truth is, I neither endeavour to conform or be singular. I desire only to act virtuously, and avoid situations which, by setting my interest in opposition to that of another person, might inspire me with a secret, though involuntary, wish to his disadvantage. 2 years ago, my Lord Marshal would have put my name in his will, which I took every method to prevent, assuring him I would not for the world know myself in the will of any one, much less in his. He gave up the idea, but insisted, in return, that I should accept an annuity on his life. This I consented to. It will be said I find my account in the alteration. Perhaps I may. But oh, my benefactor, my father, I am now sensible that should I have the misfortune to survive thee, I should have everything to lose, nothing to gain. This, in my idea, is true philosophy, the surest bulwark of human rectitude. Every day do I receive fresh conviction of its profound solidity. I have endeavored to recommend it in all my latter writings, but the multitude read too superficially to have made the remark. If I survive my present undertaking and am able to begin another, I mean, in a continuation of Emile, to give such a lively and marking example of this maxim as cannot fail to strike attention. But I have made reflections enough for a traveller. It is time to continue my journey. It turned out more agreeable than I expected. My clownish conductor was not so morose as he appeared to be. He was a middle-aged man, wore his black grizzly hair in a queue, had a martial air, a strong voice, was tolerably cheerful, and to make up for not having been taught any trade, could turn his hand to every one. Having proposed to establish some kind of manufactory at Annecy, he had consulted Madame de Warrens, who immediately gave into the project, and he was now going to Turin to lay the plan before the minister and get his approbation, for which journey he took care to be well rewarded. This droll had the art of ingratiating himself with the priests, whom he ever appeared eager to serve. He adopted a certain jargon which he had learned by frequenting their company, and thought himself a notable preacher. He could even repeat one passage from the Bible in Latin, and it answered his purpose as well as if he had known 1,000, for he repeated it 1,000 times a day. He was seldom at a loss for money when he knew what purse contained it, yet was rather artful than knavish, and when dealing out in an affected tone his unmeaning discourses, resembled Peter the Hermit preaching up the crusade with a sabre at his side. Madame Sabran, his wife, was a tolerable, good sort of woman, more peaceable by day than by night. As I slept in the same chamber, I was frequently disturbed by her wakefulness, and should have been more so had I comprehended the cause of it. But I was in the chapter of dullness, which left to nature the whole care of my instruction. I went on gaily with my pious guide and his hopeful companion, no sinister accident impeding our journey. I was in the happiest circumstances both of mind and body that I ever recollect having experienced, young, full of health and security, placing unbounded confidence in myself and others. In that short but charming moment of human life, whose expansive energy carries, if I may so express myself, our being to the utmost extent of our sensations, embellishing all nature with an inexpressible charm, flowing from the conscious and rising enjoyment of our existence. End of section 12. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.